I'm Heather Fleming, founder of In Purpose Educational Services and author of the book, My Black Friend Says.
And I'm Delaney Ray, the coordinator of the LEAP Institute. So what do we do now, Heather?
Same thing we've always done, Delaney. Keep fighting for an equitable world.
This time in a podcast.
Welcome to the Listen, Learn, Love podcast, where comfortable friends chat about uncomfortable topics.
Let's do it. So, Heather.
Yes, Delaney.
I want you to ask me how my lunch was right before this.
I'm almost scared. How was your lunch, Delaney?
Well, first I want you to know that I had black bean soup from St. Louis Bread Company.
Oh, that sounds good.
I know that I love. So if you want to know how it was, you're going to have to ask my kitchen floor and the counter and my shoe and the bottom of my pants.
Oh, no!
and the dog that started licking it up and the broken bowl that I shattered when I dropped it.
Oh, Delaney. Oh, that's terrible. And are you still hungry?
Well, so I'm not still hungry because I just shoved other much less healthy options in my mouth. But I do want you to know that when I dropped my bowl of soup and then when I proceeded to have to clean it up and then realized that there was black beans oozing down my cabinetry and down my shoe, which right now our listeners probably don't know I'm only wearing one shoe because my other foot has a boot on it because I broke my toe, my big toe in 2 places. So dancing around on beans and broken bowl with a boot on. So anyway, my point is I want you to know that I wove tapestries of foul language as all of this is happening. The words that came out of my mouth would have put sailors to shame. The old-fashioned sailor in the tattoo parlor, like comic strip that would be in the newspaper, they would have red blushing cheeks and horrified at the things that came out of my mouth. I mean, it was really not appropriate for a podcast. However, I want you to know, regardless that my food was on the floor, my dog was trying to eat broken bowl. She was so excited to eat beans, right?
Yes.
Regardless of all of that, I can promise you no racial slurs accidentally came out of my mouth.
Well, that's awesome because not everyone, apparently, I found out in life, not everyone can prevent themselves from not using a racial slur when they become upset.
Right. What we're talking about, well, you got what I was talking about.
Yeah.
So we're in St. Louis County, and recently, about a month ago, there was a St. Louis County police dispatcher who, live over the broadcast system, used the N-word.
Yes, he said that something along the lines of, being tired of these effing N-words. Something like that. It was fun stuff.
Well, the St. Louis County Police Department put out this statement. A spokesperson put out this statement. The use of such language has no place in our department. Therefore, it should not and will not be tolerated. Each member of our department family and every citizen we serve shall be treated with dignity and respect. The investigation will be thorough, impartial, and overseen by the Deputy Chief of Police, which is a nice response to that. But how on earth do we get to this place in the first place that somebody accidentally leaves their microphone turned on and shouts expletives, including the N-word?
Well, I could go into the long history of it, but basically, that is a sign of their already racist attitudes and ideologies. And so when people are like, it was an accident, no, because as you said, you had an opportunity to curse this black bean soup that was...
Oh, and I did. Yes, I did.
But you never made fun of its color.
No,
No,
no, I didn't.
you did not attack it for being black.
No, I didn't actually.
No, so
No. So
yeah,
this
we gotta
brings
do
up a
that.
good question, though. So let's talk a little bit about this particular word.
Whew, okay, let's do it, Delaney.
I know that in this setting, in this circumstance, and in most circumstances, this is the word of all words when we think of racism. In fact, I think a lot of people confuse racism with only being this word.
Right.
But I also wanted to ask you a couple of questions. And I want to say off the bat here before I ask you these questions, I'm going to give you a little test.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure with 99.999%, security here that I know the answers to all these questions. But I think this is a good conversation to have. So I'm still going to ask the questions.
Okay. Let's do it, girl.
When is it okay for me as a non-Black person to use the N-word?
Never.
Okay. But
okay.
What if I'm listening to my favorite song by my favorite musician who happens to be Black and uses that word in the song? If I'm singing along with the song, may I sing the word out loud with the music?
I see. No.
Okay.
Okay.
So what if I'm reading text? There's a book by an author that I love, and the author uses that word, and I'm reading that book out loud to an audience on a podcast as part of a presentation. Do I say the word?
Gosh, that's hard. No.
Okay.
Yeah, this is fun.
So basically what you're telling me is there are no instances during which I can do mental gymnastics and decide it's okay for me to use this word.
That's exactly correct, Delaney. There is no situation I could think of where it is appropriate for someone who is not Black to use the N-word.
Okay, what if someone holds a gun to my head?
I'm going to say one more time, no, get shot, Delaney. Don't do it. No.
Okay. Honest to goodness,
if they threaten to smash your black bean soup, you still don't use the N-word, Delaney.
Just for everyone listening, I actually knew the answers to all those questions.
She knew the answers to all of that, y'all. She was setting me up.
I really was, because I just wanted to start this conversation because I hear these things. These are things I hear people say, oh, I was just repeating what so-and-so said. Oh, but this comedian said it. I'm just repeating this comedian's line for all these laughs. It seems like this should be just a basic rule. You do not use this word. End of story. What about Black people? Talk to us a little bit about the use of this word within the Black community, because I think this is what trips other people up.
So in the Black community, it has a long and problematic history too, because in the end, when we look at the history of the word, how it evolved, how it came about, it just was a very dehumanizing and negative word. And so during this process, of course, Black people could not respond to it, etc. Well, as civil rights started coming along and things started becoming a little bit better, we had groups of people who used it more as a term of endearment as opposed to a pejorative. But the reality is that it was also part of, like, if we think about internalized oppression, there are people in the Black community that were using it to differentiate between the acceptable Negroes that had become part of, white society or were trying to imitate white society versus the ones that weren't as acceptable or successful. And so it has a very, very complicated history in the Black community. And when we look at people using it, what I often talk to folks about is the fact that, listen, this is all as far as non-Black people need to know. All they need to know is that they don't need to use the word at all. But when it comes to African Americans, it is a bit more complicated than that. We think back to it was like 1986 or somewhere around in there that I believe it was the NAACP actually had a symbolic burial for the word so that we could all Black people could stop using it in general. But the conversation continues around the word. There's this really great website that I love called abolishthennword.com. I need to check and see if it's still up. I hope it is, because I used to use that when I was teaching to just talk to kids about, here's some things to consider about the history of the word before you begin using it. But it's true. It's throughout our rap culture. It's throughout, some of our comedians use it. It's prevalent in the Black community, but it means something much different in the Black community than it does when it comes from someone who's non-Black.
And that makes sense. I think that we see that often across different marginalized groups, words that have been used negatively and used to do harm within that group. It's almost like a reclaiming of that word.
Right. I remember you telling me a really great story about a baseball team.
Yes. Yeah, that's in San Antonio, Texas. It's a minor league team.
Uh-huh.
And they are called the Flying Chanclas. And so for people who don't know what a chancla is, it's kind of like a flip-flop or a little slipper. And the Hispanic Latino community, it is really a big joke about grandmas and mamas, abuelas and mamas, that will take off their flip-flop and throw it at the kids who are misbehaving or do or say something undesirable. So the idea of the flying chancla is that you have misbehaved and you've just been, thwunk right across the head, with your mom's flip-flop for your misbehavior. But in San Antonio, Texas, and within this team, there's a high percentage of a Latino population and Latino players. And I think that it's hilarious in that context. But I don't know if you took that and moved it here to St. Louis, Missouri, with a very much smaller population. And so you would have mostly, white players and white supporters using this term, or maybe even then taking it and misconstruing it to be, abusiveness of Hispanic mamas. I think it could quickly turn into something that it's not. But we see this, I think, even as women. There are words that we will accept used from our female friends.
Right.
It would feel very different if a man, especially a man maybe we didn't have a very well-established relation. Honestly, I'm just going to say man in general would use those words against us. It would feel very different when used between established female friends.
Yeah, a good example. Well, I'm going to tell the audience that you actually taught me kind of a phrase that encompassed all this, and is insider language.
Insider language, that's right. Insider language kind of just refers to that. The people on the inside, this language has a different meaning. It feels differently when it's used than when somebody uses it who is outside of the group.
I think we find that a lot if you think about like comedy routines that people do. Like there's things that George, what's his name? He's my favorite Hispanic
Lopez.
comedian. Thank you. That George Lopez that he uses that I couldn't say. You know what I'm saying? I couldn't say as a joke or bring up as a joke, but as he's doing his comedy routine, it's, pointing that out. And it's the same with a lot of comedians in Black culture. Like one of my favorite, I'm going to forget everybody, but there's a few different comedians that they make jokes that in the end it's about Black people or Black culture, sometimes playing on some of the stereotypes of Black people and Black culture that is funny from them. But if a white comedian had come out and said it, we would be like, you know what? We need to call somebody. You're done, son. it's just a really good Deion Cole. That was who I was trying to think of. One person is Deion Cole, and then also W. Kamau Bell. He had a comedy special. Both of those people, their comedy special was hilarious, and they talked about issues related to the Black community. But some of their jokes, only they could say it because they are Black people. And so I love having this conversation, because when it comes down to it, I think that's something that when we look at our white advocates and allies, they sometimes struggle with what they're able to say and what they're not able to say.
Or when they hear the banter back and forth. I was thinking about this earlier, when kind of thinking ahead for having this conversation. And one of the things I was thinking about was a really funny conversation I was a part of. And it's kind of and insider language kind of sounds like insider joke. So it's kind of an insider joke in my personal family. We all have varying levels of skin color here in my household. And so that really plays out in the summer when it comes to sunscreen usage. My husband can look at a picture of the sun and immediately burn. Whereas I just brown up like a beautiful little dinner roll, right?
You're very beautiful.
Just brown right up like I'm just ready for dinner. So I was at an outdoor event once with a friend of mine, and they're biracial. The wife, or is that the right word? Marriage. The marriage is biracial.
Is interracial?
Oh my gosh, words are so hard, Heather.
I was like, they're both biracial?
Only their children are. I was going somewhere with this.
I got it. I understand now. So they're interracial. So one is one race and the other one is another race.
Yes, the wife is white, the husband's Black, and she was needing to find and reapply her sunscreen. And he gestured to his skin and said, "I have built-in SPF 50. So I responded, "Oh, I must have built in at least SPF 15 or 20. And she was like, expletive. I'm going to sit here and rub on, a ton of sunscreen so I don't die, from this event. And it was a really funny conversation. And sometimes that will still come up, be like, oh, I'll say I have my built-in, SPF, 20 or my built-in SPF 15.
So Delaney, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So is that the FPF that all confusing beige people need to use?
Yeah, that is actually, if you go look up that in the makeup aisle, it just says confusing beige. I just walk in and I say, I'm going to need some foundation.
I'm going to need some confusing beige.
And usually they look at me and say, I'm confused. I don't. Okay, but so this is a good example. The confusing beige conversation is really funny. It would come off very differently if I walked into a makeup counter and a very, very Caucasian European woman told me I was a confusing beige.
Oh, yeah.
That would feel very different than when you and I joke about it in the context of what we do and what we talk about.
Yeah, because some of our friends, including me, would be like, where is she?
Yeah, right.
Where do we need to come and talk to her?
I would highly recommend anyone listening not walk up to Heather or any African American person and say, "Oh, you don't need sunscreen. Look, you've got SPF 50 skin."
Yeah,
I'm going to recommend that not be a joke.
Don't do that.
Tonight.
That's not a good joke. That's not a good joke. Well, listen, let me tell you just some facts about kind of the origin of the N-word, because I think it's important to really, if we're going to understand it, to really understand it. 1619 was the first year. So we're almost 402 years into slavery in America and the beginning of, really our racist system and structures. But before 1619, of course, racist dialogue first entered our intellectual discourse in the 1400s. And they began to call people of, Black people of Africa, Negroes. And a lot of people know, because if you've taken any type of Spanish, hopefully we at least know our colors. That's about all I can remember, plus food items. I can do very well with food items. I know what a cerveza is. And so, but the Spanish word for Black is negro. And that is one of the places that Negro came from. But by 1619, when Black people started to be brought as slaves from Africa, that had kind of morphed into the N-word. And the problem is that the intention of using the N-word was to humiliate. It was to dehumanize, because if we'll remember, when people, Black African people, were brought to America and enslaved, they were treated as animals. Even some of the laws governing slavery came from laws that they had usually applied to livestock. And so this is what made it possible that, say, like when the slave trade became illegal and they weren't supposed to be bringing any more Africans from Africa to America, when they would get caught, the slave traders, rather than get punished and caught with the merchandise, they would dump the Africans overboard, still chained, so that they would not be able to fight and would sink to the bottom. And so it was this process of dehumanization that allowed them to begin calling people the N-word. And it was intended to dehumanize. It was intended to demoralize and to make sure that people stayed in their place, so-called. So we fast forward to Jim Crow and post-Civil War, et cetera. Yes, slavery ended, but those attitudes that needed to be adopted in order to justify slavery, they did not end. And so we still see in our society evidence of this horrible word. And the problem is that, yes, we got to the point, it's like for the same reasons that back during Harlem Renaissance, one of the big words that Black men called each other was man. Hey, what's up, man? How you doing, man? Because of the fact that another word that was used to dehumanize and belittle Black men was to call them, regardless of their age, boy. And so it was like building it up. And so that's what ended up happening with the N-word. They took that and they started using it to not indicate anger or demoralization, but to indicate connection. They were connected across this experience because they knew what it was to be called the N-word by white people who were attempting to demoralize them, as opposed to, being called it amongst themselves as like a show of friendliness. And so we just have to be aware of the history of it and make sure that if we're going to use it, that we're doing it for the right reasons. I personally can't think of any right reasons. My children have been taught not to say it. My husband does not say it. We really don't say it at all because, we just remember when you see it's so disheartening when you see some of the pictures of people that had been lynched and that's what was screamed at them as they died.
And I think that's why this conversation is so important, is because I think sometimes people forget that is the history that led up to these famous rappers and comedians reclaiming and using this word. But we can't, those of us who have no, African descent, who are not Black, we just can't take this word, even though maybe in our lifetime, we've just heard it and seen it used in entertainment in ways that are funny or a part of good music. The history's the same. It's that devastating history that involved so much trauma and torture and death.
Yeah. And, I think some people, they also struggle with, and this comes from, if we're going to be honest, just the fact that our society has been set up to favor one race over the other. There are some people, one race over others. There are some people who have a hard time accepting that there are places that they're not entitled to go and things that they're not entitled to say or to do. And so it's a complicated issue in some people's minds, but it's like it could be really simplified if we just say, don't use it. Don't use it at all. Don't share memes that have the word in it, even if it's funny and it really applies to your conversation or your situation. Don't even use memes that use it, because it's just not, it's not a public word. It's not for everyone to consume.
So this makes me think of the infamous Twisted Tea situation. In that situation, we see a white man. If anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about, Google Twisted Tea situation. I don't even know what. So it was in a gas station. It was a video taken, and this white man continually uses the N-word towards a black man who's also standing at the counter. But he's almost using it as though he thinks he has somehow earned the right to use it, as though he maybe is in a group of friends who are black and they use it, and maybe they've allowed him to use it. I don't know. What was your take on his insistence on using that word?
The way that he was comfortable with it and the way that he did use it, it did imply the fact that, he grew up probably around black people, and so did feel in certain ways entitled. My daughter always tells me, and my son, they go to school they go to school in a suburb of St. Louis that is predominantly white. And they have talked to me about this concept of the N-word card.
Yes, I have heard that come from my kids' predominantly white high school as well.
Right. And so it's like there are Black children that have the ability to award the N-word card to kids that they think are cool or whatever. And I have really let my kids know, absolutely not. Absolutely not. There is not one person that you would allow to do that, because of the fact that you do end up with situations like that. That guy, I'm pretty sure, has had exposure to Black people, has really been involved with and have close relationships with Black people.
Which is good.
That's a good thing.
This is a good thing.
We had a whole episode on interracial friendship and the fact that, hey, we need people of various groups, but you still need to draw boundaries. And so for me, I'll never forget, I had a discussion, an in-class discussion with some of my students. We were reading, one of the books that has a bunch of the N-word in it. And so we didn't ever say it in class. And one day I had a discussion about the N-word. And I was telling them, they were like asking me about all this stuff. And I said, well, you know what? If I'm going down, at the time, it was two friends who were two white female teachers that were my really close friends. And I was like, if I'm going down the street with the two of them and we're listening to a song and they say the N-word to go along with the song, you want to know how I'm going to react? And the kids were like, how? I was like, I'm getting ready to tear them up. We don't do that.
Were your students surprised by
they laughed because they know my personality. They know that they knew that I'm all talk. I'm a lover, not a fighter.
Right, but I think a lot of people really don't understand that just because this artist used it in a song that you
still don't have permission.
It doesn't give you permission.
I'll never forget, one of my favorite rapper is Kendrick Lamar. Okay. And so Kendrick Lamar, during his sets, has this part where he brings fans up on stage and lets them sing to one of his songs. And so one of the people that he brought up on stage was a white white girl, and she got to singing and she pronounced the N-word when it came to that part in the song, and he stopped it. He was like, no, you can't say that. But then, of course, people were really upset. Like, you brought her up on stage and you purposely embarrassed her and da-da-da-da. No, listen, if you're going to consume Black art, if you're going to consume Black talent, Black music, etc., you still need to understand the boundaries of it. And so, yes, please, by all means, appreciate our music, but there's still certain things that you can't say. Appreciate our clothing and our fashion, but there's still things that you don't need to wear. Appreciate our art, but there's still things that you don't need to put on a t-shirt. And I think it's fair. Like,
It's boundaries. It's appropriate
It's
boundaries.
boundaries. It's appropriate. And, that when it all comes down to it, that's the insert of language. When we look at how society has been set up, there's things that there's not many things that I have an advantage on, but one of them is, hey, there are words that you can't say and I can.
Right.
There are jokes that you can't make, but I can. And same thing, like with you and Hispanic culture, there's jokes that I'm just not going to make. Because in the end, on top of that, like, I respect your culture so much that I know that's not my place.
And I think that there is a time and place. Like, you know that I happen to be very close with people that are members of the LGBTQ community. I am very often, I am with and around and surrounded by members of the LGBTQ community. And there is insider language. There are jokes, many jokes that go back and forth and throughout the community and conversations. And there are times when I am with people that know me, that have experienced that I'm not just for show an ally, but that I'm there and going to show up all the time, that there are jokes maybe we'll make to each other. But as a heteronormative cisgender woman, I certainly would be very cautious of what I say or what I wear or what I do around anyone else, regardless if I know their gender or sexual orientation or not, because they don't know me. They don't know where I'm coming from.
Exactly.
With the conversation.
Exactly. And so you always err on the side of caution. You always, like, for instance, I have, I've talked to you all the time about my brother, Kale. I met Kale in college. He's like as close to my heart as possible. He and his husband, they live, far away. They live over in California with their beautiful daughter. There are jokes that even Kale and I can say to one another. Like when we talk about certain words that you shouldn't say, he can call me the B word. I call him the B word sometimes, and it's a joke, but that's a joke that we've established as a long part, a part of our long friendship. So it is truly.
But that word feels,
language.
I'm sure, very different coming from a man who has also been marginalized and who probably carries his own trauma that has been pushed on him by your traditional male masculinity. So it's going to feel different hearing that word.
It does. It does. As a man, too, that, he's... like I said, we have this long established friendship. There's an inside joke that we can sit, like, the two of us sit and talk about folding the cheese. We know.
Just fold it in, Heather. Just fold it
in, Delaney. And so it's a whole different thing. And that's what people need to understand is there's just some places. And even with the relationship that we have, he still would never, ever, ever open his mouth to call me the N-word.
So for anyone listening to this, I think the takeaway is marginalized people carry traumas that many others are not even aware of. And these words do harm and they hurt. And you need to be careful and you need to be thoughtful and you need to understand that insider language is often meant for those on the inside, even if you find it really, really funny or entertaining when you hear the members of that group use those words. It changes the safety to hear it come from outsiders. It changes the whole dynamic to hear that language used from outsiders. And so the answers to all of the questions about the N-word are no, 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 and no. And I just think it was important for me to ask, even though I promised everyone I knew the answers to those questions.
She did, I promise.
I think it's important. It's an important conversation to have.
So Delaney said it very, very just wonderfully and professionally. I'm going to say it like this. If you don't want a twisted T to the side of the face, do not do it. I don't care who told you could. Don't do it.
This has been a great conversation But I'm gonna have to go clean black beans out of the grooves of my my big foot boot. And
that sounds fun. All right. So next week, Delaney?
Yes, next week. Let's do this again. And as always, we are so thankful for everyone who listens and who joins us. We ask everyone to chime in and extend these conversations. If you agree with us, we want to hear. If you disagree with us, we want to hear. If you love this podcast, please share it with your friends. If you hate this podcast, just quietly talk bad about us where we'll never know like normal people do.
Because I'm sensitive and it'll hurt my feelings.
Because we will cry.
We will cry. We'll cry together. So yes, if you have any ideas or you just want to extend this conversation, you can email us at info@inpurposeea.com. That's info@inpurposeea.com. And as always, you can sign up on our Patreon. Our Patreon is www.patreon.com/listenlearnlove. And then you can also follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. No, Facebook and Instagram. That's the ones, Delaney. Facebook and Instagram at InPurposeES or on Twitter at InPurposeEA. So we will see you all next week and we enjoy chatting with you.
I love you, Heather.
I love you, Delaney.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode. You can support us on Patreon by looking for the Listen, Learn, Love podcast, or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at InPurposeES. That is INPurposeES. You can also follow us on Twitter at InPurposeEA or visit our website at www.inpurposeea.com.
Heather, this was great. Do you want to do it again next week?
I sure do, Delaney.
Awesome. Talk to you then.
Bye.